All right, so get ready because this deep dive is going to get a little spooky,
Uh-huh.
but in a fascinating way. We're tackling excerpts from Carl Jung's Psychology and the Occult.
Yeah, this one's a real mind bender.
It is, ghosts, spirits, visions, all that stuff. But Jung approaches it from this really unique perspective.
Not your typical ghost hunter.
Not at all. Instead of trying to prove or disprove any of it, he uses this thing called empirical psychology.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, it's all about what's happening in the mind during these experiences, like what's going on internally that makes someone see a ghost or have a vision.
So the real mystery isn't whether ghosts exist, but why people believe they do.
Exactly. And the cases in this book, oh man, there's something else. We're talking about a young woman traveling to spirit worlds, a guy levitating, even Swedenborg having this crazy accurate vision of a fire miles away.
Sounds like some X-Files stuff right there.
Totally. But before we get into all that, think about this. Have you ever been in like an old house and gotten that like spooky feeling? Or had a dream that felt so real you could have sworn it actually happened?
Oh, I think we've all had those moments where the line between real and unreal gets a little blurry.
Right. Jung thinks those everyday kind of spooky experiences might actually be connected to those more extreme cases, psychologically speaking.
Interesting. A common thread running through it all.
Yeah, so we're going to try and untangle. Okay, let's dive into one of these cases. This young woman Jung calls SW. She started having these super intense second spates, like she'd zone out, have visions, talk to spirits, and even do automatic writing.
Automatic writing, that's wild.
Yeah, imagine your hand just starts writing stuff, and it's not even you consciously doing it.
Like your hand has a mind of its own.
Exactly. Back then, they would have diagnosed her with hysterical delirium, which basically meant she was in extreme emotional distress that was causing all these weird mental and physical experiences. But Jung also saw a link to somnambulism, sleepwalking.
So is this like a split personality thing then?
Kind of. Jung thought these episodes could be tied to puberty, all those psychological changes, and the development of what he called a somnambulist ego. He even gave SW's alternate ego a name, Ivan's.
Okay, now this is where it gets really crazy. SW claimed she was traveling to spirit worlds, talking to spirit guides, and get this, she even said she could influence her sisters to have visions too.
Whoa, hold on. Is that even possible? Like one person's mental state messing with someone else's experiences like that?
Right. It's a big question Jung wrestled with. But this idea of SW influencing her sisters points to the power of suggestion.
Like how a hypnotist works.
Exactly. It's possible that SW's belief in her visions was so strong, it somehow primed her sisters' minds to have similar experiences.
So it's not necessarily supernatural, but the power of the mind itself.
Exactly. Which leads us to the big question. What does SW's story tell us about the unconscious mind?
Well, I think it shows us how incredibly powerful the unconscious is in shaping our reality. SW's unconscious essentially built a whole other world for her with its own characters, rules, and it felt completely real to her.
It makes you wonder how much of what we think is real is actually just our unconscious filtering things, shaping our perceptions.
Yeah, that's a bit unsettling when you really think about it. Like, how do we know what's actually real if our unconscious is so good at convincing us?
I know, right? It's like when you wake up from a really vivid dream and it takes you a minute to shake off the feeling that it was real.
Totally. And that's actually a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive, because guess what? We're going to talk about all the other occult phenomena that Jung investigated, things like animal magnetism, table turning, clairvoyance, and even levitation.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. Let's do it.
So, are you ready to hear about this magnetized boat?
A magnetized boat. Okay, now I'm really curious.
Well, it's actually a story Jung pulled from a newspaper. It goes back to the early 1800s when this idea of animal magnetism was like all the rage.
Animal magnetism. I vaguely remember that from psych class.
Yeah, it was this belief that people could influence things with their minds, like some kind of magnetic force.
Right. So what does this have to do with a boat?
Okay, so picture this. A bunch of people decide to try and magnetize a boat, make it move with their minds.
Wait, seriously? They thought they could make a boat move with their thoughts?
Yep. They all sat around a table in this boat, focused all their energy on it, and claimed the boat started moving on its own, even when upstream against the current.
Okay, come on. That's got to be a tall tale.
It does sound pretty far-fetched, right? But that's exactly why Jung includes it. He uses this story, kind of tongue-in-cheek, to illustrate a point about how these accounts, unbelievable as they might seem, can actually offer clues about the human mind.
So we shouldn't just dismiss them as nonsense, but try to see what they reveal about how people think and perceive things.
Exactly. Jung might not have believed all these stories literally, but he was fascinated by what they tell us about human psychology, about belief, perception, the power of the unconscious.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this. It's like how we were talking about SW and her visions. Maybe it's not about whether those things really happened, but why she experienced them so vividly.
Exactly. Now, this reminds me of another story Jung mentions, the one about Swedenborg having a vision of a fire in Stockholm while he was miles away in Gothenburg. He even described details about the fire that people later confirmed were accurate.
Yeah, that one's always freaked me out. How do you explain something like that?
Right. It's definitely a head-scratcher. But even if you're skeptical, it's hard to just ignore those accounts, especially when they come from seemingly credible sources.
Speaking of credible sources, didn't a scientist, Sir William Crookes, I think, actually claim he saw levitation happening?
Yes. Sir William Crookes was a well-respected physicist and chemist. He got caught up in this whole spiritualism craze and started investigating a medium named Daniel Douglas Home.
A medium, like someone who talks to spirits.
Yep, that's the one. And Crookes claimed he witnessed Home levitating multiple times, sometimes even in broad daylight. Wrote about it in detail, too.
Wow, so even a scientist like Crookes believed he saw this stuff happening.
It seems so. And it's important to remember, Crookes wasn't alone. Back then, spiritualism was huge, and a lot of intelligent, educated people took it very seriously.
So what are we supposed to think? Were they all just gullible or delusional?
Jung wouldn't say that. He actually cautions against jumping to conclusions. He says we need to approach these accounts with a healthy dose of skepticism, sure, but also with an open mind. The key, he says, is understanding the psychological factors at play.
Okay, so instead of focusing on proving or disproving the supernatural, we need to look at the psychology behind why people have these experiences.
You got it. It's like we all have those moments of intuition, those gut feelings that come out of nowhere, and sometimes they turn out to be right. Could that be a glimpse into a psychic world, as some believe, or is there a more down-to-earth explanation?
I've definitely had those I just knew it moments.
Yeah.
It does make you wonder if there's more to our intuition than we realize. But I'm also curious about this whole belief in spirits. Is it just superstition, or is there something deeper going on psychologically?
That's a great question, and it's something Jung dives into. He actually argues that belief in spirits isn't just some random cultural thing, but that it serves a psychological function, especially in what he called primitive cultures.
A psychological function. So he's saying it actually serves a purpose.
Exactly. Jung believed that primitive cultures, which are very connected to nature, to life and death, they need a way to make sense of the forces that shape their world, those things they can't see or fully understand. And for Jung, belief in spirits helps them connect to those deeper realities.
So it's like their belief system is reflecting the world they live in, a world where the line between seen and unseen is maybe a little blurrier.
Precisely. And here's what's really interesting. Jung draws parallels between these ideas from primitive cultures and our modern understanding of psychology. For example, he says the ancient concept of loss of soul is very similar to the psychological fragmentation we see in mental illness.
So you're saying the feeling of being not yourself that people experience during a mental breakdown might actually be connected to this ancient idea of losing your soul.
It's a fascinating connection, isn't it? And Jung also links this whole idea of spirits to the concept of autonomous complexes in the unconscious mind.
Wait, like SW and her alternate ego, Ivan's. Could you see that as a kind of spirit in Jungian terms?
That's a great observation. Remember how Ivan seemed to have her own thoughts, her own agenda? Well, Jung thought these complexes, whether personal or collective, can act like independent entities within the psyche.
So they're like hidden spirits inside us, influencing us without our knowing.
Exactly. And then there's ancestor worship, which Jung connects to the impact our parents and other important figures have on us even after they're gone.
Right. Jung talked about how parents become almost like an internal presence, part of our psyche, continuing to shape us.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, have you ever felt drawn to or repelled by someone or some place, just based on a feeling?
Oh, all the time. Like I just get this gut feeling about a person or a place. Do you think that could be my unconscious picking up on something?
Jung might say your unconscious is tuned into a deeper psychological reality than your conscious mind is aware of. Like your instincts are sensing something below the surface.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, I'm still trying to connect all the dots back to the occult.
Okay, I hear ya. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about how Jung brings all of this together with dreams, visions, and the unconscious mind.
All right, so we've talked about these wild cases, this somnambulist ego thing, all sorts of strange phenomena, the psychology of believing in spirits. It feels like we're dancing around this idea of the unconscious mind.
We are, and that's really the heart of it for Jung. You see, his main goal wasn't actually to prove or disprove spirits or the supernatural. It was to try and understand the unconscious mind and how it shows up in our lives, especially in these occult experiences.
So instead of debating if ghosts are real, he's saying, look inward, explore what's going on in your own mind.
You got it. And a big part of that for him was through dreams and the visions. Jung saw these connections between dreams, visions, and even mental disturbances.
Like they're all connected somehow.
Exactly. They all involve unconscious content, things hidden deep down, suddenly bursting into our conscious awareness. Like these experiences give us a peek behind the curtain into this hidden world within us.
Oh, I like that. A peek behind the curtain. So our dreams are like coded messages from the unconscious, and visions are even more direct, a full-on blast from the unconscious.
Perfect analogy. Now, Jung made this distinction between two levels of the unconscious, the personal and the collective.
Okay, the personal unconscious, that makes sense, right? It's like all our forgotten memories, stuff we've repressed, those complexes we talked about, like our own personal stash of unconscious stuff.
Right, unique to each individual. But then there's the collective unconscious, and this is where it gets really wild.
Collective unconscious, what's that about?
This is like a deeper level, and it contains what Jung called archetypes. These universal images, kind of like blueprints shared by all of humanity.
Whoa, so you mean we're all connected through this shared unconscious? That's a pretty big idea.
It is, and it's filled with these powerful archetypes, like the hero, the mother, the shadow, the self. They pop up in our dreams, in myths and stories from all over the world, even in our everyday lives.
So how does this all tie back to spirits? Where does the collective unconscious fit in with that?
Well, Jung proposed that those experiences of spirits might actually be encounters with archetypes from the collective unconscious.
Wait, so those ancient gods and goddesses, spirit guides, ghosts, even demons, those could all be expressions of these archetypes.
That's exactly what Jung suggested. It's a pretty radical idea, right? But it changes the whole game. Instead of seeing spirits as something outside of us, he's saying they might be projections of our own minds.
So we're creating those experiences ourselves without even realizing it. That's mind-blowing. If our minds can create such convincing experiences, what does that tell us about our ability to shape our own realities?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think the takeaway from Jung is that exploring the occult isn't about proving or disproving anything. It's about turning our attention inward, exploring that vast hidden world of our own minds.
By understanding the unconscious, we can understand ourselves better, our beliefs, all those weird things that happen that we can't explain.
Exactly. Next time you have a crazy dream, a strong intuition, even if you get the chills in a supposedly haunted place, remember, you might be bumping up against the mysteries of your own unconscious.
Wow, this deep dive has been a real journey. It gives you a lot to ponder.
It does. That's the point, right? Expanding our perspectives, finding new ways to understand ourselves and the world around us.
Totally. So until next time, happy exploring, everyone.